Hey everybody, this is Kevin from Fort Orange Woodworking, and today I am with my lovely assistant, and we are going to show you how to make this ultra thin, very cool decorative serving tray made from reclaimed 100-year-old barnwood and epoxy resin, color picked out by this little peanut person right here. So stay tuned if you want to see how I made this, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them. I'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned. This is going to be a cool project. Thanks.
Let's get started. The first step is to take my reclaimed wood, and as you can see, I have laid it out on my plywood to get a rough idea of what my final product is going to look like. I've also got a couple of straight pieces of scrap wood that are there. Those are going to create the frame so that my epoxy has boundaries and limits. Prepping the surface right there on my piece of plywood, and the next thing I'm going to do is lay down my tuck tape. The tuck tape is going to keep it so that the epoxy doesn't rip the plywood right off of the board when this is a final product. So without the tuck tape, that resin will stick right to the wood and just tear it right off. You could also use masking tape or duct tape. However, tuck tape is kind of ideal for this specific type of project, and just comes off nice and easily because it's plastic. Once I've got my tuck tape all laid down, I measured so that I can insert my second set of rails on the end. This will create a completely enclosed framework for the resin to rest in. Held together with just a couple of brad nails on the end, and this will be ready for a little bit more tape. Very important that you try to keep this surface area as dust and particle free as possible, because once the resin starts to get poured, anything that's trapped in there is going to get trapped in the resin. So very careful to keep this dust free, and also to cover every little bit with tuck tape so that you're not sticking directly to wood. So one more thing I'm going to do here in a second is I'm going to take this scrap block and I'm going to kind of smooth things down and even get my mallet out so that I can get all of those corners and crevices, because any little folds and wrinkles in that tuck tape are going to form when the resin hardens. So if you have a wrinkle in your tuck tape, you're also going to have a wrinkle in your final project. All right, and here is where I make my first mistake. So I've done river boards before. I've done some small ones. I've done some large ones. I should really know better, but when I was starting this project, I was really excited to just dive into this one, and I didn't weigh my boards down when I started pouring. So ideally, to keep this flat, those two boards should be weighted down with something. They don't have to be clamped in necessarily, but they should have some kind of weight on them to keep them from drifting and floating as the resin gets poured in. So this is going to not have a serious impact on the final product, but it's definitely going to have an impact, and you'll see why in a little bit. Now what I'm doing is I'm using my rubber gloves and a little bit of the epoxy that I poured directly on top of the wood to just rub a little bit of that into the wood. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this wood is very dry, it's very brittle, and if I can introduce some of the epoxy right into the wood before I start pouring the foundation, if you will, this is going to help seal the wood and take care of any future bubbles that I might get. It's just going to help to create an extra layer of protection as the project goes on. So we're just mixing up the resin, making sure that we're not introducing too many bubbles. You can see that this is where I start to get my color. This one was chosen by my daughter. She wanted to see what the purple looks like. And what I'm using is a black diamond pigment powder, which gives a nice pop to your resin. And I will include a link to this in the description. Ready for our first pour. So I'm going to start in one corner, work my way down the outside. It doesn't matter if I go over the wood because I'm eventually going to be pouring resin over this anyway. Making sure that it's nice and even. You don't want to start too thick on one side and too thin on another. And you can see where I'm pouring right now, there is a little bit of gap right under that space because I did not weigh the boards down. So if I weighed the boards down, that gap wouldn't be there. And now what's going to happen is that resin is going to flow right underneath that, which is okay because it's going to fill the space. But at the same time, that's not what I wanted. I don't want to fill that space. I wanted the boards to fill that space. So that was mistake number one. Not a big deal, but not ideal. You want to make sure that you're getting a good even pour across all of the surfaces that are going to be against your tuck tape. But at the same time, you also want to be sure that you're not pouring too thick on your first pour. So make sure that you measure carefully when you initially start to measure out your resin. You don't want too much because a thick pour is going to be tough to get bubbles out of, and it's not going to cure as nicely as thin layers. Now, at the same time, it's also difficult to color match when you are pouring in thin layers. So make sure that you're also measuring out the amount of dye that you're using for each batch, and make sure that those are proportional as you move on to extra layers. Additional step here, and I poured some of the resin from this cup directly onto the wood, and I worked it right in with my fingers. And because this is already dyed, and I'm working it right into the fibers of the wood, it's gonna show later. It's gonna be tough to see on camera, but later on, it's got a really cool effect that this resin is right in the wood. Very important step here. I am hitting this with the heat gun, and you can see I'm holding it pretty close. I'm not trying to burn the resin. I don't want to hold it in one spot too long, but I got to get those air bubbles out, and this is one of the best ways to do it. I could also try this with a torch gun, but my torch gun was melting the tuck tape, and I didn't like that, so I went right to my heat gun, which for me usually does the job. I get it nice and close, high heat, and I just keep moving it around. And you can already see that it's getting like a nice clear, glossy look to it. That's because a lot of those air bubbles are being worked out. Moving on to the second pour here. I'm just using my fingers to work this into all of the spaces. It's really important though that when you start your second pour, the first pour should be at least dry, if not cured. You'll notice also that I'm not doing a colored pour for my second one because I want that to be more of a top coat than a purple coat. And again, this is where the heat gun becomes very important because you'll actually see the bubbles come out. So the heat gun comes over and this starts to become a nice clear finish. You can also see why it was important that I treated the boards with the resin in my initial stage because those boards had a chance to become sealed, and it's going to make for a nice, clean, glossy pour towards the end. Once the resin has fully cured, after about 24 hours or so, you can remove it from the mold. You don't want to remove it before, otherwise you'll get chunks and pieces coming off with the mold.
But otherwise, once it's cured, this mold will just break right away from the plastic because we used the tuck tape initially. So nice and easily, gently, I'm breaking the form apart, which is why I used brad nails, because the brad nails will hold the wood down, but it won't hold it forever. You could also use screws and then just remove the screws. That works pretty well too. I went ahead and got a putty knife to get the rest of this off from the bottom. I didn't want to just start ripping and prying because this pour is really only about a ½ inch thick. So I don't want to take a pry bar or a claw hammer and just start trying to rip this off of the board. The resin is pretty strong stuff. It does have a little bit of a weld to it, so I wanted to get something nice and thin under there to create some space. I don't want to just pry it up and snap it off and watch all that hard work go down the drain. So the putty knife is kind of ideal for this situation. Nice and easy, take your time, and it'll get there. Once you get it fully removed, then you can start to trim it and finish it as you see fit. With resin, you can run it through a router. You can put nice edges on it. You can run it through your table saw or your miter saw to get nice clean edges, which is what I'm going to do on this one. I'm going to give this more of a square finish. I'm not going to run this through my router because I don't want to upset the barn wood. But you can trim this up however you want. I'm going to take a couple more steps on this, finish off the edges, add some handles, and this is just about done. This is now the final result. I am really happy with the way this turned out. I didn't do a whole lot to finish it. I cleaned up my edges, both sides. I rounded off the corners just a little bit by hand. And of course, I added this hardware, this really cool brass wheat style handles, which I picked up from a garage sale for next to nothing. Adds a really cool decorative touch to this. And I'm specifically filming in this room because I want you to see the light behind me when you do the resin. As long as you go light enough with your color dyes, you can get that really cool effect from the light. Really cool project. This is only a ½ inch thick. This exact product is for sale at my Etsy shop, Fort Orange Woodworks. At Etsy, I will leave a link for that. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about this riverboard. Tell me what you think about the video. I am going to be putting out more riverboard videos in the near future, so stay tuned for those. And again, please remember to like and subscribe. Thanks again. I will see you next time in the shop. Have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.